All did great though.
All right, let's see if it works this time. All right, here we are. Wonderful. Welcome everyone to the 2023 YAP Professional Panel. We are so glad you are here. I'm going to start us off. My name is Charlotte Huffman. I am the community-based programming director at GRCB. GRCB empowers girls, women, and gender-expansive youth and adults to believe in themselves by building a supportive community that fosters self-expression, confidence, and collaboration through music education and performance. And one of our very favorite programs is the Youth Activism Project, also known as YAP. Today, the YAP Youth has gathered a bunch of professionals who relate to the research that they've been doing all year, and they are going to lead us deeper into their topic of discrimination, misinformation, and representation of LGBTQ folks. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Zoe and Katie, our YAP Youth, as they lead us through this panel.
Hi, so I'm Zoe. I'm 17 years old. I'm one of the YAP youth. I use any pronouns. We have a few panelists here today that we're going to be asking some questions about our research that we did. I'll pass it over to Katie, and then after her, we can have our panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm 14. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also one of the YAP youth. Yes, so panelists, do you want to introduce yourselves?
I'll go first. My name is Anna Cuevas. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a video production teacher at a public high school, and I just got my master's degree in community engagement, where I focused my thesis on race and ethnic representation in film and television. And I've always had an interest in the kind of connection between race and LGBTQ plus, and just intersectionality in general. So I'm very excited to be a part of this panel.
I'll go. Hi, my name is Lauren Boughton, and I work at the Williams Institute. I'm a research analyst. So the Williams Institute is a research and public policy center studying LGBTQ issues. We're made up of lawyers and social scientists, and I work on the social science team, mainly analyzing survey data and kind of doing exactly what the YAP research panel did last week. That's my job.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shannon Waters. I use she, her pronouns. I am a comic book editor and comic book writer for 8 years. I founded and ran the Boombox imprint at Boom Studios, and Boombox focused on marginalized creators, basically a number of kind of racial, gender, and sexuality expansive stories for youth and teens. And I am the co-creator and co-writer of a comic book series called Lumberjanes, which is a lot of lovely queer kids read and enjoy.
My name is Mamie. I use they, she pronouns. I am the social media associate for the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU for short, here in Massachusetts for that affiliate. We are a nonprofit organization that works in the courts, in the legislature. We also have an incredible field team that works to defend the civil rights and civil liberties of residents here in Massachusetts, and also working to perform overall in collaboration with the ACLU affiliates and national ACLU across the country. I am a queer person, excited and privileged to do this work and to be here and share space with you today. I'm super excited about it. I'm also an artist myself outside of work, and with social media comes design and writing and all that fun stuff, but to be in company with artists is always incredible. And so I'm super hyped to be with you guys.
Oh, thank you so much. So we're gonna ask our panelists questions in like 3 different categories, which are discrimination, misinformation, and representation. But if anyone who's watching our live stream wants to ask any questions for the panelists or for us, you can just put them in the chat. And Katie, do you want to start with a question?
Sure. Okay, so our first question is about discrimination, and it's, how would you describe discrimination?
I'll go first. Hi. Well, I like this question. I liked having to think about it. And I think the first thing I thought about was how sometimes it can be really subtle because we don't always know. We don't know our own biases sometimes. And also you don't always know why someone is maybe excluding you for a reason. It's not always obvious if someone is LGBT. And so sometimes we don't really know, but a way that we do know is through the data. And it's like very evident and clear that there is disparity between LGBT and non-LGBT people and people of color and white people. And so, so I think we can see it on a personal level, but we can also really see it clearly on a societal level.
That was a very good answer. Thank you. Our next one is, why does discrimination happen, or why do you think it happens?
This is a pretty broad question, so I'm going to take a stab at it. But I think it's important to acknowledge as we talk about discrimination, and as Lauren mentioned, some folks don't realize what they're doing with implicit biases, is that discrimination occurs because we have an unjust system, and our country was founded on ideals that do not treat all people equally. And so acknowledging that why discrimination occurs is because it is unfortunately woven into our society and our structures, may that be in legislature or how housing works or how employment works or many other pieces that go along with that. It occurs because we do what we are taught to do, and unfortunately those systems are not always treating people equally. And intersectionality, like all of the different identities that can come together that make people who they are, may that be their race or their ability physically, or their gender identity, sexuality, all of these different pieces may affect people in different ways, and it doesn't always work the same for everyone. So I think the answer to like why it occurs is because we are taught and live in an unjust system and world, and so it's our job to play an active role in changing that, especially if you're in a position of privilege. Taking on an active role to address that is incredibly important.
Our next question kind of ties into that. What is the impact of discrimination, and what is the harm, and like what is the overall impact, and like systemically and also locally?
Again, this is a big question, so I'm taking a stab. Obviously there are a million like big and small impacts of discrimination as we like move through our lives. I think that it is, we're talking about intersectionality. It's important to realize that the quote unquote small ways that discrimination impacts somebody, whether it's someone who, a boss doesn't hire because they don't have the proper experience, and that proper experience would have required that they grow up in an urban center, that they have an upper middle class upbringing and disposable income to work and generational wealth to work at a unpaid internship or whatever. That then that person and their experience is not then actively present in whatever that organization does. That person is not able to work for change in that role. And it's, on one hand, a small thing, a person passing over a job application, but it has a huge impact on maybe who gets resources from that organization, or what stories are told by a publisher, or obviously, like what laws are enacted, who gets to rise to a prominent political level. The impacts are systematic, and kind of and far reaching, and the greatest impact is the status quo, is that the harm continues to be done over and over because the people in power continue to stay the people in power. So that was a stab, if anybody has anything to add.
Yeah, that was really good. Sorry about the kind of broad questions we have here.
No, they're great.
We have two more questions that I can kind of like put together. So our questions are, have you ever seen or experienced discrimination? And then our next one is, what should you do if you see or experience discrimination?
I would love to hear kind of everybody's experience in this one. I work in entertainment and in media, and I've been really lucky to have to work somewhere where for a long time it was a smaller team, and I kind of got to set my course right. However, if you work in any kind of system, you see things like the thing I just said, which is like publishing has a super intense whiteness problem because of the barriers of entry to publishing. It's not, it is a system where unionization is not particularly prevalent, and worker protections are not particularly prevalent. Those unpaid internships I mentioned are often where people gain connections or experiences. I work in comics, and so folks meet each other at expensive art programs that require an enormous amount of resources to attend. And the people in power are often, cis, straight white people who are making the decisions about what that we publish. You work with bigger entertainment organizations in any sort of media these days, right? Like, comic books are very popular at the movies. You can work on a lot of licensed projects, and licensing means basically that if somebody wants to publish a Adventure Time comic book at Cartoon Network, somebody pays them a fee to be the one to do that. And those studios are beholden to a number of prejudices that they operate on thanks to our capitalistic system. Something can't be unappealing to the quote unquote masses, and the masses are cis, heteronormative, whiteness. And so, it is quite something to turn in your rinky dink little comic book for approval and have essentially professionalized homophobia come back into your inbox, and have to just, it's a day at the office, right? And so it is combating that is, I think, a process of active unlearning, active pushing back, putting yourself on the line, and basically a lifetime of learning, and listening, and action. Yeah.
That's a really powerful answer. The next question, oh wait, sorry.
I was just going to add, in terms of combating discrimination, it's important to recognize, and for myself, my journey as a human being, that though I may face LGBTQ discrimination or discrimination based on my gender, I also benefit from white privilege and also privilege as an able-bodied person. And so being able to use that position in order to advocate for other folks or other folks in your community, I'm in a less dangerous situation because I grew up moving about the world as a white able-bodied person in middle-class America, that was born in this country. And neither of my parents were incarcerated. There are many different ways that things affect folks' lives. And so I think part of understanding facing discrimination is when something happens, the person that is directly impacted by that discrimination might not be in a safe position to address it or like take it on. But if you are in a position to say, this happened, or whether that is being a bystander and intervening in that situation, or doing what you can, or the way that you vote and how you move about the world, I think when thinking about discrimination, it's very important to address that though we all may have faced discrimination for queerness, there are other identities where we have privilege. And so spending that privilege and using it and being in solidarity with other communities is incredibly important. And also recognizing that we don't always know what those other communities need from us. And so inserting yourself and saying like, I'm going to do this to help you is not always the best move, but to say like listen first, listen to what other folks need. Don't burden other folks with the responsibility of educating you, but try to continue to be a forever learner. And as folks that may face discrimination as queer people, we may have a little taste of what it might be like, but we will never know what it's like to stand in the shoes of a person of color in America. And so not claiming to, and also just knowing that show up with when folks are asking things of you, and also just continue to be a forever learner in terms of facing discrimination for other communities. So I think there's a lot there, and I hope I made sense of that a little bit, but a continued commitment to learning and understanding that there are ways to continue to educate yourself about ways that other folks are impacted by discrimination as well. Also, Shannon, I loved hearing your story as well. That was incredibly important, especially with the employment stuff. It's not always a safe environment for queer people, so I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I think that's really important to think about, like intersecting identities and where we have privilege and where we might not. So the next question is also a big question. It's very big. So what are ways to stop discrimination, whether it's, again, like on a smaller level or very big imagination of that? What do you think?
I would say, as someone who is in media, more diverse media, I think a lot of people create their thoughts and opinions on groups of people based on the media that they engage with, especially if they have no personal interaction with that group. If you don't know queer people, you may get your understanding of queerness and queer people from the media. And if that media is negative and stereotypical towards queerness, then that will absolutely affect the people watching it. So I think a way to help stop discrimination is to create diverse and queer media.
Yeah, that really fits into what we talk about with like our representation and kind of what we were talking about in our research. So yeah. Does anyone else want to add anything, or Lauren? Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with the media, and yeah, I've always thought like, how can we, because there's people who live in rural parts of this country. There's people, you're in your own little bubble and you're not exposed to people. And I think there's even studies about like the level of intolerance, or I don't know what they would use to describe it, towards a certain group, is related to whether or not you interact with that group. So yeah, I've always thought like we need to get, mass media needs to have all this representation. So yeah, that's not a new idea for me, but yeah, also I just wanted to add that, data is important. I'm here to advocate for the data, and getting questions on surveys and things that ask about LGBT people, because not a lot of surveys do, even just starting in 2019, the census when it asks, how you're related to the householder, it now says same-sex unmarried partner, same-sex married partner. And before that, if people chose that said they were married, but then their partner was the same sex, they did all sorts of weird things to the data to correct it. So it's like, it's 2023 and we still like struggle with this, but we use that data and then we can give it to policy makers, lawmakers, whatever, so that they can make these protections. Because I think what we really need is, it's got to be a law that these people need to be protected. I mean, because we can't just leave it up to people to do the right thing always. So I think as a culture, we have to protect people.
I would also add like that there's a huge importance in getting involved in your communities. And when I say in your communities, I of course mean your town, or, these bigger ideas of community, but also in your friend group, also in your school or in your classes. That's your community. And standing up for ideas like anti-discrimination, standing up for for information. There's a reason that the last couple of years folks have chosen book bans as a tool to combat what they perceive as essentially too much information. Information is a combatant to discrimination. It is an empathy machine, and and so getting that information out of the hands of young people is a tool, and that's something that you can work to combat in your local communities. Community is extremely important and often a very effective tool of anti-discrimination. You listen to your friends, you listen to the people in your life that you love, and they listen to you.
Thank you so much for those responses. It was very good. Now we're moving into like our next little section of questions, which is about misinformation. So our first one is, how would you describe misinformation?
I think there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation, which is very important. And misinformation is false and inaccurate information, just getting the facts wrong. But disinformation is false or inaccurate information that is deliberately meant to deceive or mislead. So I think that misinformation is spread by disinformation.
That kind of ties into our next question about how is it spread and why do people pick up on misinformation? What is so interesting about it that people listen to it and believe it? And is it just that people don't know? What do you think?
I think a lot of this has to do with confirmation bias. And so if you find a piece of information or a piece of data that confirms something that you already believe, or that you want to believe, or you want to get other people to believe, emphasizing that, reiterating that, making that information prominent, even if it's wrong, is something that can just confirm folks' views and kind of sway an ideology to keep kind of producing the same facts. I think that the social internet has a lot to do with this. If you hear terms like clickbait or polarity or algorithms and all of these fun things that people love to shout about, and communications professionals love to geek out about, me included, it is enticing and exciting, and folks really love to think of like shaping minds or teaching folks. And I think it's appealing because it makes people emotionally excited, which makes them more likely to click on things or more likely to watch more videos. Or when you see something that's like, oh my gosh, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life, I'm going to run this at this thing and keep researching it. Social media companies and media companies in general are selling our attention. There is an attention economy, and folks want to keep you engaged. They want you to keep watching TV or keep watching that YouTube channel or keep scrolling onto their page, keep clicking their things. And so if they keep confirming how you feel with facts and data and giving you things that seem crazier and crazier and so interesting, and you want to bring it up to your friends and chat about it on the bus, or that escalates. And the more you look at it, the more money the advertisers make, or the more money those social media companies are giving those accounts. So why not continue that behavior and keep feeding the beast with information? People do it because it makes them money. It makes media companies a lot of money to have your eyes looking at something and engaging with something. And so it's important to recognize that when you're looking at misinformation and disinformation and media, we are the product and our attention is the product. And so they want you to keep looking at that thing. And if it's crazy and interesting and confirms how you feel about a community or confirms how you feel about an issue, they don't want you to look away because they're making money off of your eyes or ears or however you're consuming that media. So that's kind of a lot at once, but yeah.
Can I add something? I think it's there's a few avenues like the technology and the internet and social media, the news, and then also in the research world, it's a thing where, you know, people are able to publish, like, basically discredit someone's research and publish it in a journal, and then which is complicated in itself, like trying to understand what the journal, how this journal published this and who the editors were, and maybe they're connected to some religious group, or I don't know, there's all sorts of things. But you know, then that science is used by other, you know, maybe conservative groups to in legal ways, in legal arguments and things. And maybe the, you know, worries me, the people in the legal system not knowing scientific research either, and accepting that as truth. And yeah, maybe that's disinformation. I also get confused about that. But so there's a lot of ways that, you know, and I think there's a lot of groups now who are trying to address this and be more proactive about it, because I don't think in the scientific community, people haven't been as proactive because, you know, they just, you know, my boss, someone discredited his whole like thing, and the only thing they could do is respond via another journal article. And it's like, what does that do? I don't know. So anyway, yeah, I'm fascinated about this topic. It scares me because it has so much power, and I want to find ways to be more proactive about it. Yeah, so I don't really know the answer though.
Yeah, from like the experience online, it's not a hard rabbit hole to fall down into with misinformation. will come up eventually if you are online or spend enough time online. Something will come up and you may not even realize it. And so, like, how can you direct someone who has fallen for misinformation for what the actual truth is, whether it be like an older person who, is seeing stuff on Facebook, or even like a younger person who doesn't really have much experience online and found something and they're believing it, or whatever, something like that.
The first thing I'd like to mention is that self-care is incredibly important, because when you watch folks in your life fall into that's an ideology of misinformation, especially when that information is discriminatory towards your community or people you love, it's incredibly hurtful and it's hard, and you kind of feel like you're screaming into a void. And so understanding that, like, you as an individual person are probably not going to like white knight and save this person in order to believe the truth, because there are movements and there is a huge, like, dangerous, as Lauren mentioned, thing happening where folks are believing misinformation that unfortunately causes them to treat people in a bad way. And so understanding that, like, it's not your job to solve that problem. There is a huge, vast people in many different fields trying to help. And so you're not alone in that. And it can be really sad, especially when someone you love, and I'm speaking from personal experience, falls into a web or like conspiracy is the problem right now, and it's scary. It's really scary. Media literacy is incredibly important. Advocating for media literacy, may that be if someone you're looking to elect into local office. School board elections are incredibly important. Shannon mentioned book bans. The ACLU has a lot of resources related to book bans and specific advocacy we've done here in Massachusetts. If you're looking for some juicy, like, quotes or information or things to say, like, there are people on the ground fighting against this. But understanding that media literacy is incredibly important, and also ask questions. And it's easy to do this in a way that is, like, somewhat diplomatic or not threatening. For example, if someone says, I heard on the news that insert offensive or incorrect fact here, or a lot of people are saying, which is the title of a really good book about this topic. But they ask them, do you know where you heard that? Or is there a study behind that? I really like to look more into this. Is there data on this? Like, that's really crazy. I've never heard of anything like that. Where did that come from? Or can you point me to the video where you heard that? Just kind of not being like, I think that's wrong, and just coming at people combatively, but just kind of asking innocent questions of like, that's really interesting. Where did you hear that? Like, poke at it a little bit. If someone uses a generalization of like, a lot of people are saying this, and like, I heard this, you're like, where? That's so cool. And let them talk and let them fumble in front of you and watch them kind of unravel themselves, because it makes your life a lot easier, and it can be super funny as well, for like some lighthearted stuff. But in a more serious tone, just know that misinformation and conspiracy is a nationwide problem that we're facing. And so if someone you love or someone is hurting you, or your community, that burden is not only on your shoulders. There are queer elders, and there are data scientists that are incredibly passionate about combating this, and media folks, and we're in this together, and we're trying to fight against this, and you're not alone. And it is hard, and it's okay to be validated in that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting asking questions, because I've seen when people have a belief and then you ask about it, and it just, like, you see people thinking about, oh, why do I think this? And like, where did I hear this? So I always think that's really interesting. Our next question is, again, another big one. What are ways to prevent the spread of misinformation?
I think Mamie touched on this a bit with media literacy. I think with the advent of social media, misinformation gets spread so much quicker and so much easier. So requiring the teaching of media literacy courses in public schools so that students understand how to dissect the media that they're engaging with, and also know how to tell if something is truthful information or just misinformation. And that's something that I do in my own courses. I teach a broadcasting course and we go over media literacy. And I think it's super important, especially like everyone has like TikTok and Instagram and all these infographics and videos are popping up, and everyone's just taking in the information and not necessarily digging deeper to find out if it's true. So yeah, I think media literacy courses are a big way to help prevent the spread of misinformation.
Yeah, I've had like technology or media classes like in school, and we've like touched on like how to protect your information online, but never really like media literacy, which I think is really important to be teaching kids, like even really younger kids, like in 3rd grade or something like that. So if anyone has anything else to add, or we can move on to our next section, which is representation. Okay, so how would you describe representation and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, okay. I would love to hear what everyone says for this too, but yeah, I think representation is the answer also to misinformation, and I think it's about the truth just being visible, like creating visibility for groups that are seemingly invisible, and because LGBT people exist, so let's tell the truth about that. And they're real people and they're just like everybody else, and so yeah, I think creating visibility, and my heart sings when I see media that has like all the group people represented, and especially when I know, like in your research presentation, you mentioned who are on the teams that are creating this media, like is it also people who are part of these groups, and yeah, give like people have touched on, just giving those people the power to create, and it's just like the best stuff comes out of it. So that's what I have to say about that.
I think truth is a really, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't raise my hand.
No, go ahead.
I think truth is a really beautiful word here, because it's giving folks who traditionally do not have a voice in our cultural conversation the resources to tell their stories and tell their truth in a way that has reach, in a way that gets into the hands of folks. It is something that I said that I think about a lot. I went to the American Library Association's convention last year, and librarians are the best. They're just the best. They are the warriors at the front lines of all of this. The hard thing, but the encouraging thing too, is that if a book is getting into the hands of the wrong, or like in the wrong people, and they're railing against it, that it's probably getting into the hands of the right people too. And giving people power to have their truth be on a platform, I think, is what representation is and what it's about.
I wanted to connect with what Lauren said about kind of like media producers and like who is creating the media that we're engaging with. And there's actually a theory called representation theory by cultural theorist named Stuart Hall. And it basically says that there are a lot of ways for people and events to be represented. And with that fact, media producers utilize media to create specific meanings and understandings of these people and events. and the centuries of racial and ethnic representation, LGBTQ representation in film and television has affected not only the way that white people see and treat those groups, but also the way that racial minorities and LGBT groups see and treat themselves. Because media is most often created by white, cisgendered, able-bodied men. So we're getting those stereotypes, those negative stereotypes that they're harboring.
Yeah, those are all really powerful. We asked in a survey we sent out, we asked people about representation, and they said really similar things about how they see it and how they want to see it. Yeah, that's really interesting, really powerful. So this next question is one of my favorite questions to answer about representation, which is, why is it important, and how does it help people, and how do you see yourself in representation, and yeah, why is it really important for people to see themselves?
Thank you for this question. There's a few pieces to it, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about like seeing representation in practice, and to go along with and like elevate what everyone has said. I think who the decision makers are and putting a diverse range of people into decision-making positions is incredibly important. May that be the folks selecting what media you consume or creating that media, being fully employed by creating that media, or elected officials, or what a court looks like, or what a jury looks like, what your teachers look like, who are the authors that you're reading. Making sure that that's representative of a diverse range of populations really impacts perspective. So if we're looking at a problem together and there is folks who have had a similar upbringing or life experience sitting around a table trying to solve a problem, they may be overseeing a solution or an implication of this proposed solution because they just haven't been in a position where it impacted them. If it's kind of an assumption of like, oh, we should create this after school program till about 5 o'clock because, you know, that's a nice time for everybody to go home and have dinner, and like, let's create this after school program to give kids a place to go. But you're not thinking about the parents who might be working a second shift at a job, and so they're not able to pick their students up, and so those students are excluded. Or maybe the room that the after school program is hosted in is not accessible to folks in a wheelchair, or this time conflicts with an ESL class that's taking place at another time at the same school. Those are things that if you haven't personally experienced them, or if no one in the room has, you just might not realize. And so when creative solutions are made, it's just everybody shouldn't come from the same place or be the same type of person, or, you know, representation is important in decision-making groups because it just allows better and more comprehensive things to get done for more people. And that can spread to like a minor, like, hey, let's make sure everybody in the friend group agrees that we're doing this thing on Saturday, or hey, let's make sure that the Supreme Court is representative of what America looks like. You know, it can, everything can be impacted by that. And for me, that just means that there is work to be done, because not all groups are representative of what America looks like or a specific community looks like. So when you're looking at a school board, or you're looking at who is an elected official in your community, or maybe even just personally what media you're consuming, if you're listening to podcasts or audiobooks or looking at social media users, kind of some internal self-reflection to be like, am I only looking at white creators and white authors? Have I ever read a book by someone with a disability? Have I ever engaged with media that was written by someone who's formerly incarcerated? Like, just internally, you can do some of that yourself with what you consume, and then also advocate for that to be done for decision makers in your life.
Maybe that ruled. And is it okay, Zoe and Katie, if I ask you a question? What do you remember, like the first time that you saw a piece of media that portrayed queerness in a positive light? Like, do you remember the first time you were like, that's cool, that's cool? I would love to hear. I just,
I think for me, my parents have always kind of showed me a diverse books and showed me diverse media, and I always have really seen different identities and different cultures represented. So I think probably for me it would be when I was really little, just like seeing in general so many different people, so many different identities and cultures represented. So I think all my life I've really been surrounded by that in media. So yeah, that would be for me.
Yeah, I can say the same thing pretty much. I've had a lot of diverse media throughout my life. I can't really think back to where like the first time I saw something was. Um, yeah, I don't really know. Like I can think of examples from a while ago. Like I remember watching Sailor Moon and there's like a lesbian couple in Sailor Moon. But yeah.
Uranus and Neptune. Beautiful. I'm almost 39. And I only asked that question because y'all, got on this call and told us what your pronouns were and are asking us these incredibly insightful questions. And representation can also make you feel safe to inhabit your truth, and turn that truth into power. And I think that's a really important thing to note too, is that visibility and positive representation, the truth, the idea of representation as truth, as opposed to furthering kind of an agenda of stereotypical, I would say like tamping down, can make people feel safe. And I think that that's important as well.
I'm really glad you said that. That was really, I agree. And I just wanted to add that, the saying being celebrated, not instead of just being tolerated. I said that wrong, but yeah, I think that that's something that matters to me with media, and just like normalizing, celebrating our differences, and just the difference I feel when I'm going into a space where I know that, it's LGBTQ friendly, just how relaxed and safe I feel, just like, oh, I can be myself, versus going into a different kind of space. Just that difference is, I can feel it in my body. And yeah, I think, it's just like, it's loving, it's creating an accepting, loving, safe world.
Thank you so much for those responses. Yeah. We have two other questions that I think I can kind of put together. So we have one that's, what's the difference between accurate representation and misrepresentation in media? And then like, what's an example of some of the worst representation you have seen and what made it so bad?
The entire history of mainstream media for until the 1%, until 1995. It's rough out there. It's, and it's still rough out there. Again, I didn't come out until I was 25. And it's because I didn't know the gay woman in a positive way in life, and I certainly didn't know a butch, masculine of center gay woman that was it was a positive image. The butches were quote unquote scary, and it is bad and worse for many other marginalized groups, you know, disabled folks of different races. It, you know, literally anything, different body types, different are portrayed in the majority of media. I watch movies from when I was a teenager, and people are using the F slur in like a PG rated movie about high school. Okay, great, fabulous. And that's what, you know, guys in my school, when I was in high school, that was normal. And it's like, it's all bad. It's all terrible. Anyway, go ahead.
A big part of that has to do with the Hays Code in Hollywood, which was a set of guidelines for all films that were created between 1934 and 1968. And the Hays Code actually forbade explicit depictions of homosexuality and queerness, and oftentimes would make queer-coded villains. And so this resulted in either no depiction of queer characters or extremely negative depictions of queer characters as deviant. And the Hays Code was lifted in 1968, but it obviously like still persisted throughout, you know, film and television history. But thankfully, when the code did lift, we did start to see some filmmakers like John Waters using like actors and like famous drag queen Divine in films in the 70s. And then that also allowed us for films in current day, like Dee Rees's Pariah or Barry Jenkins' Moonlight, which allowed for the intersection of queerness and Blackness. And that's something that wouldn't have been able to happen even 60 years ago. So it's crazy to think about. But yeah, the Hays Code definitely, even still, even though it's not active, it still has a huge impact in what we're seeing in terms of representation.
And it's interesting the ways that folks subvert those restrictions. You know, you think of my favorite queer-coded villain in the world is Ursula from The Little Mermaid, who was based on Divine. And The Little Mermaid was brought to you by an HIV positive man named Howard Ashman, who was one of the great lyricists of that we lost far too soon of the kind of late 20th century. He's an amazing lyricist. Basically, you know, all of the stuff that you love in Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid and big parts of Aladdin were brought to you by Howard Ashman. And he, you know, he made Ursula lovable. She was a villain and she had to be, right? Like, you know, you can't have a fat, queer-coded being be a hero, but she was also lovable and wonderful. And the ways that folks subverted that history is really interesting. And those codes existed across various media. Comics had the Comics Code, which until the 80s, there was a little symbol that said approved by the Comics Code of America. The Comic Book Legal Defense Fund purchased the trademark to that seal, and they sell t-shirts now as they defend people against censorship situations. It's very interesting.
So this is kind of the opposite question. What are some books or shows or movies or media representation that you think has good or positive representation of LGBTQ plus people?
I think movies and shows that deal with intersectionality. I mentioned Moonlight, Barry Jenkins' Moonlight, allowing for the intersection of queerness and Blackness. I think that's like such a great example of of representation, positive representation.
This is something that's quite tragic a little bit. So it's a heavier book. I'm not sure what the age bracket of the folks who are listening into this live stream are, but a very well-known and incredible queer comic named Alison Bechtel wrote her life story in Fun Home. It's also an incredible musical. I had the honor and privilege to play medium Allison in a production of Fun Home. And as someone who grew up in community theater and grew up as an actor, it was the first time I got to play a queer character and to play a butch on stage. And it was, not only was the story wonderful and her writing is incredible, but the representation of going into an audition and knowing like I'm about to play a butch and I'm about to read and I'm about to sing and I'm about to be on stage as a butch and tell a story of someone coming out, and to come out on stage over and over again at rehearsal and in front of audiences was really incredible. And so there are many ways that she's been spearheading representation in media, but also when they made her story into a musical, it opened up a lot of doors for actors because there are not a lot of queer female characters written. And often those queer characters are inappropriately sexualized, or like it's not in a fun way that they're written, but this was a story where it was like awkward and goofy. And so I'm grateful for that experience and also the media that she has written.
Okay, so we have to stop the live very soon. So if there's any last few things that anyone wants to add, you can add them now. And if there's any questions in the chat, maybe we can answer a couple.
Before we get questions in the chat, I wanted to really say thank you to you both for such a lovely, insightful panel. It's incredibly heartening that young people are doing this incredible work.
Yeah, I also want to second that. Really inspired and thankful for this conversation and opportunity, and just impressed with you all, and the research that you did was really cool. It's like exactly what I did in graduate school, so you're like already like way above what people are doing. So and just these panelists, like I'm I've learned a lot, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should go back to school for media studies. And I wish I had I could get all the recommendations from you all and take classes from you. And just thanks for allowing me to be a part of it.
So we just want to say thank you all to the panelists, and thank you for the people watching. This has been a really great panel. Yeah, so anything you want to add?
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. I really loved hearing all your responses and everything you had to say and ask us. It was really so interesting to learn.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, every single one of our panelists. You were amazing. This conversation was incredible. We had a lot of positive feedback in the chat. And we just don't have time to answer the one question that did pop up, but I just want to say thank you from GRCB. And we are going to close out. So bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.